This is the case of convicted murderer Burton W. Abbott. Racing against time in the death house. It was one late evening as the day was fading when the hounds picked up a scent. Following the bloodhounds were San Francisco Examiner reporter Ed Montgomery and photographer Bob Bryant up alone, manzanita-covered ridge. On July 20, 1955, the two took a chartered flight to Trinity County, where they had a frustrating afternoon looking around the property of the man who Berkeley police believed had killed a 14-year-old schoolgirl. Montgomery and Bryant requested the assistance of a local to give them his hounds for a last-ditch search as the day appeared to be spluttering to an unimpressive conclusion. They started moving uphill almost immediately. The troop arrived at the top of the small clearing at 8:20 p.m. "You saw what we discovered there," Montgomery wrote. Stephanie Bryan went from Willard Middle School to her house at 131 Alvarado Road, a quiet street directly behind the Claremont Hotel, every day during the workweek. She occasionally went for walks with Mary and Stuart, a friend. They frequently paused for a bite, as on the afternoon of April 28, 1955. They visited the Elmwood Pet Shop and Dream Fluff Donuts. They then moved toward the Claremont Hotel's entrance by moving along Ashby. Marian waved to Stephanie as she left for her tennis lesson at the nearby courts. She observed Stephanie ascending the Claremont driveway in the direction of her preferred detour, a flight of steep stairs leading up to Alvarado from the hotel parking lot. It takes roughly 5 minutes to walk from the parking lot to 131 Alvarado. Stephanie disappeared somewhere on the way. Mary, Stephanie's anxious mother, called the school and the houses of the girl's friends around 4:15 p.m. As usual, everyone saw her leave school and make her way home. Mary then called her husband, Charles, a radiologist at a hospital in Oakland. They called the police after he hurried home. Although they were unaware of it, the largest search for missing people in Berkeley history had just started. Until dusk, Berkeley police searched the hotel's grounds. The hunt resumed the next morning. However, nothing was there. No witnesses, no lost school bag. Then a break on May 1st, among Stephanie's. A girl's autographed textbook was discovered abandoned on the side of Franklin Canyon Road. 6 FBI officers were among the 100 searchers who descended on the Contra Costa Hills. No signs of Stephanie were discovered. The only other information came from several witnesses who recalled seeing a young woman struggling in the back of a gray Pontiac on Tunnel Road on the day Stephanie vanished. According to a witness, the girl looked to be shouting, "No," while the male driver reached around to strike her in the back seat. The news quoted Stephanie's father as saying, "The thing I can't comprehend, the one that creates the gloomy image for all of us, are these folks who observed a girl being assaulted in a car on the highway and who didn't interfere or even notify the police. Are we numb to seeing someone beaten because we're so used to it?" Months follow weeks. But in July, everything began to alter and grow irrationally stranger. Georgia Abbott, 32, the head of the State Cosmetologists Association's Oakland chapter, enjoyed throwing parties. She went downstairs to the Alameda home she shared with her husband, Burton, when her friend Otto Desmond recommended they look for costumes for the most recent event. She knew there was an amusing hat and a box of old clothing down there that would be ideal. Her fingertips brushed against a crimson purse as she dug around. Odd, she observed. She didn't possess a crimson handbag. Georgia let it in. An identification card for Stephanie Bryan, a teenage female, was found inside. She hurried up the steps in the basement and exclaimed, "Hey! Is this not the girl who vanished?" "It was," Desmond shouted, and demanded that she phone the police. Burton Abbott didn't really respond. When police arrived at the Abbott residence, they found Georgia bewildered but calm. Burton, a 27-year-old UC Berkeley accounting student, sat still on the couch working on a crossword puzzle. He immediately stood out to investigators because this was the Bay Area's most widely reported missing person case. History. Every day, Stephanie was on the front page of the local publications. And here was Burton Abbott, a man who didn't seem the least bit concerned about her purse being found in his basement. With only sandy earth covering half of the floor, the basement was only partially finished. Police began to excavate. They quickly discovered a gruesome cache, including Stephanie's bra, spectacles, school supplies, and 2 library books. When questioned, Abbott claimed they had been placed there on purpose. A few months ago, the house served as a polling center. However, because just the garage was accessible to voters, the police were dubious. At first, Abbott initially told a story about his whereabouts on April 28 that would change several times over the following year when he was questioned about it. In order to travel to the family cabin in Trinity County, he claimed to have left his house at 11 a.m. He first stopped in Sacramento before moving on to Wildwood later in the day. At the time, he claimed to be a gray Pontiac sedan driver. Soon after the trip, he traded it in. Abbott struck me as a rather improbable suspect. He had a serious case of tuberculosis that required him to spend some time living at the Livermore Veterans Hospital. He was skinny and weedy, and his chest had slightly caved in. He had met his wife there. Their son was 4 years old. The media gathered at their door that evening heard Georgia boldly say, "I know it was impossible for my husband to do this." The Examiner reporters showed up at the Abbott's Wildwood cabin 2 days later. Together with George's father, a miner by the name of Lloyd Snyder staked the 20-acre claim in 1940. But by 1951, Snyder's situation had deteriorated. He got into a fight with a friend one night and shot the friend dead. Snyder sawed the body in that cabin, placed the parts in gunny sacks, and buried them on the land. George's brother gave Georgia the deed 4 days before he was transported to San Quentin. In an amazing coincidence, Stephanie's disappearance occurred less than a month after Snyder was released on parole. The police promptly and openly disqualified him as a suspect. Therefore, his alibi must have been absolutely solid. The Examiner newsmen searched for another while walking on the spot where a murder victim's body formerly lay. They encountered the toughest situation of their lives just before dusk. The foot of the leg that was protruding out of the ground was still wearing a little white saddle shoe, and the dogs were sniffing around it. A few days later, Montgomery wrote to the newspaper, "I'll never forget the scene. It was a nightmarish scene." Before calling their editors, who were about to publish the scoop of the century, they hurried back to town to summon the police. A second Examiner reporter quickly went to Abbott's house to inform him of the discovery. His earlier composure vanished, and he began to sob. He sobbed, "I don't know how the body got there. I have no knowledge of that. I'm sticking with my narrative." The news was received by Stephanie's parents with their typical stoicism. When asked if he believed Abbott was her killer, her father merely displayed the tiniest hint of rage. He responded coldly, "I'll bet you right now that he never visits the gas chamber. The only thing on my mind right now is when they'll free the crying sister and hand him over." In November, the century-defining trial got underway. It would dominate the front pages of neighborhood newspapers every day for the next 4 months. The Examiner engaged renowned crime author and Perry Mason creator Earl Stanley Gardner to work as a freelancer for them. Every Berkeley home had to read his daily trial analysis, which ended with a cheery, "See you tomorrow, guys." J. Frank Coakley, the district attorney for Alameda County, was blunt in his opening remarks. Coakley claimed Abbott embodied extreme egoism, greed, and vanity. Coakley pointed at Abbott and said, "We'll show that the reason she never got home is right there." Despite his battered confidence, Coakley still had a steep road ahead of him. Despite the large number of materials discovered in Abbott's hands, he lacked any witnesses who could positively identify Abbott and Stephanie, and there was also no concrete physical proof. Like Stephanie's father, the majority believed a conviction was doubtful. Timeliness was the key factor in both the prosecution and defense. They would each work for weeks to prove their version of it. The first witnesses for the prosecution tried to follow Abbott around Berkeley that day. When Abbott stated he was halfway to Trinity County, a witness claimed to have seen Abbott in Pring's Dutch Girl, a donut store on Telegraph close to Willard Middle School, at 3 p.m. Another eyewitness reported seeing a vehicle similar to Abbott's run a red light at College and Ashby, which is near the Claremont Hotel, at about 3:30 in the afternoon. Similar accounts of a girl yelling for help in the back of a car after 4 o'clock were provided by 5 different witnesses. Although no one could be certain, everyone believed Abbott to be the driver. According to the prosecution, Abbott held Stephanie down, sexually assaulted her, and then killed her somewhere in the Contra Costa Hills before continuing to Trinity County to bury her body. Despite not having any evidence, they did call a few key witnesses. 1. The innkeeper at the Wildwood pub Abbott claimed to have visited the night Stephanie was killed, vehemently refuted that story. According to the innkeeper's testimony, Abbott never arrived that night. Another resident from Wildwood claimed to have gone to Abbott's cottage the day after Stephanie vanished. According to him, Abbott appeared to be acting oddly, and, contrary to the habit the two had established during earlier trips, he stated Abbott did not invite him into the cabin. The Abbott's babysitter served as the third witness. She remembered Abbott making a call from the cabin on the night of Stephanie's abduction when pressed for details. The rest of the family was instructed not to accompany him that weekend. Poor weather prevailed. As the experiment entered the second month, fall changed to winter. Earlier in December, a pathologist gave testimony. The jurors were given exhibits to examine. One included a box with a piece of red dirt from her grave that bore the girl's garment as an imprint. According to the examiner, bits of flesh were still adhered to it. The pathologist testified that Stephanie had died from a head injury caused by blunt force. Her throat had been bound tightly in undergarments. Abbott's jailers, who had previously commented on how soundly he always slept, claimed that at this time in the trial, he started to lie awake at night. Abbott's defense centered mainly on his physical attributes. His attorneys contended that he was far too feeble to have committed the crime. To murder a 14-year-old girl, a man of some strength is needed. Then there was the burial, which was perched on a hill. They asserted that Abbott could not have lifted her there. The female weighed 105 pounds, while he weighed 134 pounds. The witness's testimony that day didn't support his case, despite the display's strength. Dr. Elmer Schaubert, who had been treating Abbott for years at the Livermore Veterans Hospital, claimed that despite his previous illness, Abbott was no longer crippled and had made a full recovery. In addition, Schaubert observed a noticeable shift in Abbott's personality. Early in the 1950s, he was aggressive when he was first admitted to the hospital, and he questioned the medical staff about every treatment. However, he reappeared a short while after Stephanie vanished. Abbott's attorneys made a tremendous error by putting him on the stand just before Christmas. Things initially went smoothly. He described his movements on April 28 in great detail and said that Stephanie Bryan had never once crossed his path. The cross-examination then started. For 3 days, Coakley interrogated him. 11 of his 13.5 hours spent testifying involved Coakley. The examiner observed that his responses to Coakley presented a dramatic contrast with those he delivered in response to inquiries from his own counsel, when he claimed to have almost complete recall of the events of April 28. Abbott would say, "I don't know," or "I don't recall," for extended periods of time, up to 15 questions in a row, for extended periods of time. That day, Montgomery's piece stated that the list of conversations and occurrences which Abbott could not recall had reached an incredible length. He was once questioned about why he didn't call a family member while up at the cabin. Abbott responded. Because I didn't have his phone number. Laughter broke out throughout the gallery. The following week, when evidence resumed, Coakley attacked Abbott's chronology. During one police interview, Abbott spoke about his typical commute from Alameda to the UC Berkeley campus for class. Coakley remarked that it appeared to be a particularly good path for avoiding Stephanie's school. And then, when asked to provide his normal route once more, Abbott provided a path that did pass the school. He was prompted by Coakley to specify which was his typical commute. Abbott said, "Both of them." "How is it that both of them are on your regular route?" Coakley responded, evidently exasperated. A significant portion of Abbott's alibi timeline was exposed as a fraud by Coakley. Abbott said on the witness stand that it was untrue despite his repeated claims that he had been in Sacramento at the time of Stephanie's abduction. He had not traveled at all to Sacramento on that day. The concluding arguments were presented by each side on January 18th. Coakley awaited that precise opportunity to make his most shocking revelation. He took off the knotted underwear that had been discovered around Stephanie's throat, despite the fact that the jury had already seen Stephanie's garments several times. The murderer had sliced her twice with a knife, severing their connection to her. Coakley often referred to Abbott as an unrepentant psychopath, as he was furious. He observed, "They are charming on the surface. Although they leave a fantastic first impression, they do not carry it off well. They are dishonest. They lack the ability to truly and genuinely love someone." Newspapers claimed that Abbott was stunned and terrified. The Examiner stated that he wilted. He slouched in his chair till his neck appeared to be resting on it. Harold Hove, Abbott's attorney, emphasized the lack of tangible proof when it was his turn to speak. The sole basis for the state's case was a set of suspicious circumstances. Hove countered that Otto Desmond, George's friend, who had been present when they found Stephanie's handbag in the basement, may have actually been the real murderer. For 7 days, the jury was in seclusion. They hinted that they would reach a decision by January 25th. Abbott's mother, Elsie, shouted and bolted from the courtroom when the first guilty count was read. The second guilty verdict was missed by many due to the confusion. The allegations of first-degree murder and kidnapping, however, also carried the death penalty, so it made little difference. Mary Bryan, who had only glanced at Abbott once throughout the trial. "He may have been a piece of furniture for all the interest she demonstrated," the Examiner wrote, had nothing to say regarding the decision. She only needed to know when she could go to the mortuary and retrieve her daughter's body, which had been kept there while the trial was ongoing. "Now we can get Steffi back," she remarked. On March 25, 1957, a Monday, George T. Davis, a lawyer from San Francisco, was in a terrifying rush. According to his wristwatch, it was 8:50 a.m. Burton W. Abbott, 29, who had been found guilty of killing a teenage girl, would pass away in the gas chamber at San Quentin in 70 minutes. Davis anxiously awaited the U.S. Court of Appeals' decision on his request for a stay of execution based on his argument that Abbott had not been given a fair trial. The response then appeared. The appeal was refused. Davis walked quickly. Maybe Governor Goodwin J. Knight of California would agree to a short reprieve. The governor, however, was not within reach of the phone as he was just getting ready to examine the Navy's aircraft carrier Hancock in San Francisco Bay. Davis coordinated with a TV station to broadcast a taped plea to the governor after sending a message through Navy radio to the ship to turn on a television for Knight. Knight received the message. He called Davis on the telephone at 9:02 and got an hour's stay. Davis delivered a writ of habeas corpus to the state Supreme Court 6 minutes after that. At 10:42, the response was received. The petition was denied. Attorney Davis made another attempt, this time sending a hasty communication to the Federal District Court. A further delay was rejected by Judge Louis E. Goodman. There were still 10 minutes left at 10:50. May God bless you. There was only one more opportunity. Davis quickly entered the Supreme Court clerk's office, grabbed a phone, and made another call to Governor Knight, who was, as Davis subsequently claimed, having tea in the Hancock's flag plan room. Davis claims he received a busy signal even though there were 2 active radio telephone lines on the ship. After trying in vain to reason with a resolute phone operator, Davis called Knight's Capitol offices to request authorization to enter one of the lines. Goody Knight answered the phone at 11:12. Burton Abbott, a former accounting student who was accused of killing the victim's purse after his wife discovered it in the Abbott cellar, was carried into the jail gas chamber at 11:15 while huskily and adamantly claiming his innocence. After a little while, Abbott was given a handshake by Warden Harleo Teets, who muttered, "God bless you." The prisoner simply replied, "Thank you." A medical professional fastened a stethoscope's lengthy tube to Abbott's chest. The restrained Abbott was led to the execution chair, where he sat peacefully. In addition to bolting the door, the warden and other officials fled the chamber. 3 minutes later, the executioner manipulated a lever, causing 16 sodium cyanide pellets to fall into a container of sulfuric acid underneath Abbott's chair. The toxic vapors started to ascend. "Has it begun?" At last, Davis was on the phone with Governor Knight in the clerk's office, insistently saying, "There's a new point of law. There isn't time for an explanation. Can you make it stop?" Knight took up his other phone and spoke with Joseph Babbage, his secretary. Knight overheard Babbage's dialogue as the secretary made a direct phone call to the warden. "Has the execution begun, Babbage?" Warden: "Yes, sir, it has." "Can you stop it, Babbage?" Warden: "It's already too late, sir." Burton Abbott remained still as he sat in the execution chamber and stared straight ahead. The intangible gas ascended. His feet shook, and his head dipped back. He passed away as the governor hung up the phone on the carrier. News of the dramatic split-second event spread quickly throughout the country. Attorney Governor Knight spoke loudly and said, "I made every effort to give Mr. Davis every chance to add anything fresh to the case. He was unable to accomplish this. In exchange, he waited until the very last minute and then filed an appeal for yet another stay, pulling off a spectacular stunt for which he had no legal justification." A calendar of tragedy. The governor said that Goody Knight's open lines were not busy, but lawyer Davis maintained that they were. However, more significant than even the fact that Davis had a prior opportunity to enter a plea was the obvious illustration of how a jumbled-up legal system can lead to catastrophe. On the one hand, according to Davis, if the state Supreme Court declines to grant a rehearing, an attorney has 90 days under federal law to request a writ of certiorari, a re-examination of the record. However, in Abbott's case, the state court set the execution date 2 weeks ahead of the allotted 90 days. The writ was still on file, thus there was a remote chance that convicted. On the one hand, according to Davis, if the state Supreme Court declines to grant a rehearing, an attorney has 90 days under federal law to request a writ of certiorari, a re-examination of the record. However, in Abbott's case, the state court set the execution date 2 weeks ahead of the allotted 90 days. As a result, there was a slim chance that convicted murderer Burton Abbott may have obtained a new trial as long as the writ was still on file. Elsie Abbott, the mother in a notorious murder case, dies at the age of 100. She never lost hope in her son's goodness. The San Francisco Chronicle's Carl Nolte. May 2, 2004. Elsie Abbott believed her son was killed by the state of California when he was put to death in San Quentin's gas chamber 47 years ago, until her death on Monday, despite the evidence to the contrary. Mrs. Abbott, who lived on the East Coast, passed away at the age of 100. At its center was Elsie Abbott, a devoted and obedient mother who was certain that her son was innocent of the kidnapping and murder. She had always thought that the true murderer was still at large, and she had even proposed the conspiracy theory that her brother had set up her son. This is a wrap for this case, and this sick man did this egregious thing to a minor, a little girl, and stole her life and innocence. Please like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this.